Hi, Susan.
Hi. Give me just a minute to get situated here.
Yeah, I'm just hearing music. There we go.
All right. Turning on the
Hi.
video. There we go. Hello.
How are you?
Good. Just getting set up one last thing and then I'll be ready to go.
Okay.
Okay, wonderful. Okay. Hi. Welcome,
Hello.
everybody. Just had to get situated here for a minute. How you doing, Jeffrey?
I'm doing well. Doing well. Looking forward to
Good.
seeing you later this week.
All right, just turning off my printer behind me because I can't hear. Go ahead and great. All right, welcome everybody. Hello, Firesiders, and welcome to Adventures by the Book, where our mission is to connect people and communities through the power of books. I'm your host, Susan McBeth, and I'm honored and humbled to be hosting part 2 of our very special 5-part series based on Jeffrey Blount's The Emancipation of Evan Walls, our Conversations in Race series. As I mentioned last week, I hope most of you are joining us from last week, but welcome to those of you who weren't able to join us last week, which means we're going to repeat a little bit of information at the beginning just in case we have some new viewers for today. The Emancipation of Evan Walls is a powerful novel that we are going to know intimately. Last week, we learned about the protagonist, Evan Walls. This week, we're going to be talking about his parents. And then in the ensuing 3 weeks, we're going to be talking about other characters in the book and partaking in an interactive conversation about race so that we're afforded a unique opportunity to have a meaningful and respectful dialogue to open our minds and hearts and hopefully our world. As I mentioned before, I love doing this on Fireside because it was developed to do just that, to have meaningful and engaging conversations and dialogues that allow our virtual audience members to jump up on stage with us to share their thoughts and questions, which we are encouraging everyone to do. As I mentioned, I am going to reintroduce Jeffrey Blount for those of you who didn't join us last week. He is an award-winning author of 3 novels, Almost Snow White, Hating Heidi Foster, and The Emancipation of Evan Walls, which was winner of multiple awards, including the 2020 National Indie Excellence Award for African American Fiction, winner of the 2019 Reader's Favorite Book Award, winner of the 2019 American Book Fest Best Book Award, and a Shelf Unbound 2019 Notable Award. Pretty impressive, Jeffrey. He is also an award-winning television director. Absolutely, give him a round of applause for sure. He deserves that. He's also an Emmy Award-winning television director and a 2016 inductee into the Virginia Communications Hall of Fame. During a 34-year career at NBC News, he directed a decade of Meet the Press, The Today Show, NBC Nightly News, and major special events. He's also an award-winning documentary scriptwriter for films and interactives that are now on display in the Smithsonian Institution Museum of African American History and Culture. I'd like to welcome our virtual audience, those who are joining us on our public profile page and those who are joining us on our social media channels. I think most of you are probably familiar with Fireside by now, but just a quick reminder, you can hop on stage anytime by clicking on the round black circle in the lower left-hand portion of your screen. And you can react and type comments in the lower right-hand portion of your screen where you see the react button, and there's different emojis with accompanying sound effects. So Jeffrey, We
Yes.
talked last week in depth about Evan Walls, the protagonist, but can you, for those who are joining us for the first time and as a recap from last week, can you kind of once again provide a synopsis of the book, The Emancipation of Evan Walls, which is right here?
Thank you. Absolutely. So, in chapter one, when we meet Evan, he's 10 years old and he is finds himself in the midst of a conversation on his back porch with his family and neighbors. This is something that happens quite often. And they are discussing the many trials and tribulations in 1968 of being an African American in the South. And a character by the name of Bojack goes on a rant about how the community is not doing enough for the black children, how they need to step up and support kids, and he even advocates that they know that integration is on the horizon, that black kids should go to school with white kids, um, because he just feels like he's learned that education is the way to an equality that they've never been able to achieve. Well, young 10-year-old Evan gets caught up in this. And at one point, he stands up and he declares that he wants to do what Bojack is talking about. He wants to become somebody. And little did he know that this declaration, this drive to become somebody, to become educated, to use his intellectual prowess, was going to force him to walk on a road between two different cultures, basically. He had a white culture on one side. In 1968, he would not have been surprised to be told he was not up to snuff academically, and didn't belong with the bright white children. He would have been shocked, and was, to find that members of his own community would feel that that the notion that he should become educated was wrong, that it was somehow color coded white, and that he was going to be set outside of his culture and outside of his community as long as he tried to do this. So this is about Evan's journey to find the freedom to dream the way he wants to dream, to use his intellectual abilities to achieve those dreams, but to have to put up with the struggle between two different cultures. And the main surprise, the main focus is on his culture, his African American community that turns against him.
Yes, and not only his own community, but his own family, his
Yeah.
parents, and that's who we're going to be talking about today. Augustus and Trini are Evan's parents, and they are, as you describe them, Negro aristocracy in 1960s Canaan, Virginia. And they love having the status. I mean, they own land, they have a big house, they have a family farm, things that their neighbors don't have. Um, can you talk a little bit about that situation, how they got to that situation, and how the community looks at them because of that?
Yeah, what there is a strange sort of thing that has happened in many cases in the South as um, slavery ended and we moved into Reconstruction and that positive period of time in Reconstruction. There were some slave owners who actually gave land, and to slaves, that, if you can say, slaves that they cared about. That sounds like a strange thing to say, but they did give land, and I chose to put that in the book, because you really, to have what Augustus and Trina had in 1968, you just don't come by that. Black people just don't buy that. Then it has to have some legacy, and so they were given this land by the man, or the family that used to own them, had come down, had given this land away to the ancestors of Augustus. And so they were in a much better position because they had land. He could be his own boss. He could farm his own way and not have to be dictated to. He made his own money, and that put them in a class in the Negro community that was aristocracy. They were at the top of the list. And so this is why people were, as Evan says when he's just talking about why this gathering occurred every once a week on this porch, is because so many of the people wanted to get next to Negro aristocracy. They wanted to be next to Augustus and Trini and feel what it was like to have some control over your life because most of them did not.
And so one would think that given their status and how they embraced that, that they would actually be supportive when Evan Walls, their son, announces that he wants to get an education and better himself. Yet that's not the reaction he gets. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the reaction he gets is surprising. It was one thing to have the community turn against you. It's another thing to have your parents turn against you. It's another thing to have your parents to want you to dumb it down a little bit so that we can remain comfortable with the little folk as they look down on their neighbors and friends. Um, they were concerned about their reputation more than they were concerned about their son's academic dreams and skills, and that he would actually might want to do better as he grew older and do something different. So one of the reason why this occurs in the book, excuse me, it's because there was an article that I read in the 80s about a young boy who was living in the projects, and the reporter was living in the projects, writing about family life there, so that we would all know what was going on. And he came across this story. This 10-year-old boy, he was brilliant, loved going to school, loved to study, loved the whole thing about it. And this little boy was beaten up every day by his contemporaries, his African American contemporaries, for doing well in school, for acting white. And so the reporter went to the family to say, I'm amazed at what your son is putting up with. I'm kind of proud of him, for trying to do this every day and live his dream, but it's got to be hard for you to watch this. And the mother looks at the reporter and says something like, I wish he would just want to grow up to be a janitor or something and stop causing me so much trouble.
Wow.
So I thought about that long and hard. And I said, what is she saying? She is saying that I might not have a whole lot, but I'm comfortable in my community. I'm respected the way I am. And we as Black people are, at least in her world, are acting in a similar fashion. We are reacting to the world in a similar fashion. And so I want to maintain that. I want to maintain what I have in my community. Now I've got this nerdy son of mine who wants to act like white children. And rather than see his potential and that education is not color coded white, she feels that he is putting her in a position of losing her friends and losing her community. And she is not able to see past that. She's misinformed about the education, and she's lost total focus and reality on what should be her focus when it comes to her son's dreams for his education. So when I wrote the book, I decided that I wanted to delve into that. I wanted this mentality to be a part of the book because it was real. It's out there. And in fact, I'm trying to think of when there's an article in the Washington Post, April 13, 2019, about a young boy. Well, I should say a college age boy by the time we get to him in the article, and African American, and teaches himself to play the cello on YouTube and becomes a part of this orchestra at the school. And what we find out is that his his family has reacted in much the same way as this woman with her child in the projects. He says he's sometimes the target of family jokes for getting good grades and acting white. They make fun of me when I sound intelligent. They make fun of my grammar, the inflection of my voice. His mother and his siblings were jealous that he did so well in school. But she believes that her son was spurning his racial identity and family and stepping outside of his culture. So there we have two real life examples of parents who are turning against their children. It was so stunning to me that I felt like it had to be a part of the book. And as a writer, if you're looking for a device to create tension for the reader, I can tell you that the reaction I've had from readers is that everybody has picked out this point and said, how is it that parents can turn on their children like this? Why did you make this up? So I love being able to say to them, I didn't make it up. I'm representing it. And the reason I'm representing it is because you can't even imagine your own life and your parents telling you that getting an education is a bad thing and that you are ruining their lives because you are trying to do better. It just doesn't make any sense. So that's how the whole story, how the parents got into the book.
Yeah, and that was in, you said, 2019.
2019, right?
That is
Hmm.
just stunning to me. Stunning.
Yeah.
But so Evan's parents, in fact, did experience what they were worried about because the whites put them back into place through economic sanctions after this, and they actually ended up losing their property. Is that correct? Can you talk about what happened then and how that affected his parents and him?
So this, yeah, and I guess I'd like to say up front here, there is this issue of acting white in the book, but it is a subset of the larger issue of systemic racism. Um, and I've tried to, throughout the book, show how systemic racism created this and helps maintain it. And so what you have is, a black guy, or back in the 60s, a Negro who is too big for his britches. At one point in the first chapter, you hear that he actually challenged a white store owner for charging him more than he charged a white man who was in front of him. So he's too big for his britches. So they do what happened in my with my family. And my father's a black farmer, my grandfather is a black farmer, my uncles were black farmers, and they just would cut the price and say, you show up with your truck one day with your feed, and they say, okay, your price is, you get half of what we're giving white farmers, or a quarter, and you can't argue. There's nothing you can do. And so many black farmers would then find themselves unable to plant in the following year. They just didn't have the money. And this is what happens to Augustus. The great Augustus Walls, it's all of a sudden brought down. And this and he begins to show you the insidiousness of systemic racism, because he can't do anything about it, but it's beginning to eat him alive. And then he's not the only male that experiences this throughout the book, but it does have an effect on how he sees Evan, because eventually he turns that hatred that builds up into him, this hatred for anything and anybody white. And so now add that on top of the distrust and the negative feelings he already had for his son. Now you add that on top of it, and poor little Evan has really got a battle.
Yeah, and then he witnesses this horrible experience between his father and a couple of white men. Um, can you talk about that a bit?
So, this goes back to Augustus saying to the store owner that you charge me more. So then two white gentlemen from, if I can use that term loosely in my book, show up, and they basically physically attack the father to try and to put him in his place, to let him know he's not allowed to speak to white men and challenge them in their stores, and they can charge whatever they want to charge, and they can give breaks to white people if they want to, and make him pay more if they want to. And it wasn't enough to say that, they had to attack that. And Evan had to, he didn't have to, he saw his father being attacked. He saw his father, a big man, over 6 feet, tall and strong. Evan talks about in the book how he tosses 100-pound feed bags like paper. I mean, like potato chip bags. That's how strong he was. Yet these two men backed him down and physically assaulted him, and Evan had to watch that. The father didn't know that Evan saw, but he knew that his wife witnessed that, and it cost him in the percentage of dignity that he carried with him on a daily basis. And it's also an example of what I wanted to show. Another insidious thing about systemic racism is intergenerational trauma. That moment set the father against developed a strong trauma inside of him that he fights with for the rest of the book. And that trauma comes out in all different ways, including how he reacts to his children. So his reactions to Evan is, explodes, gets even worse because of the trauma. And then we know Evan takes that in physically and emotionally, and he is subjected to that trauma. So we just pass it on generation after generation. And I'm trying to make the point is that when people say, oh, this happened, 40 years ago or 50 years ago, 100 years ago, we should get over that. You should get over that. Generational trauma is the negative gift. If you can have the financial blessing of from generational wealth. Well, this generational trauma is the opposite, which is what Black people have in abundance in this country. I knew my great grandmother who was a child of a slave, and I would say to people sometimes when I would give speeches, and I'd say, when you shake my hand, you shake everything that she gave me, everything that comes with me. It doesn't disappear into the ether because it happened when she was, a child and now she's 90 something years old, almost 100 years old. It's still there because I see it in her. She tells me the story. So when you shake my hand, all that stuff comes with it. And so that's what I'm trying to show in the book, that so many things move generationally. And this trauma that Augustus absorbs in the first chapter, he loses the ability to farm his own land. He is attacked in front of his wife, and he can't handle that. He gets so upset, he's yelling at her because he got attacked. And she ends up hiding out with the boys, trying to find safety in their bedroom because he's on a rage, which is understandable, but at the same time, you worry about how he's going to treat his family. So this is the struggle, the overwhelming struggle, overarching struggle that Evan must find his way through.
And I'm really glad you brought up and talked about intergenerational trauma because, I mean, how many times do we hear, slavery was years ago, get over it, And so it's a really important point you make. And on the converse too, there's intergenerational racism because how do you think little children become racist in their innocent eyes when they hear their parents say things over and over? I shared my own experience with that last week, and I'm happy to
Yeah.
talk again. Not happy, that's not the right word, but this is the conversation I want to have with the audience today. I want people to come up on stage and talk about your own experiences growing up, whether it is in terms of intergenerational trauma or whether it's intergenerational racism. What did you experience from your parents, from your grandparents in this regard? Because I think it's a really important thing we discuss in this conversation on race. So I'm really encouraging people to do that. And I do see Kenyatta Berry in the audience. Kenyatta is the PBS Genealogy Roadshow host, expert on African American genealogy. And I'd love to hear her take on some of this as well from all the research she has done. So, Kenyatta, if you feel inclined, we'd love to have you join us up on stage and talk about that. And while we're waiting for any audience members to come up, I want to talk a little bit about Trini because Trini is she's a really proud Black woman, and she actually thrives more on their status than her husband does.
Okay.
And then as she watches him get beat up by these two white guys and what happens to him, then she feels like she's got to take action for the family as well.
Well, I'm sure you've heard. I've watched it happen my whole life. That in many ways, Black women have quite a lot of weight to shoulder. So, in most cases, um, I'm amazingly blessed when I look back on the life I had in my childhood and the way my parents worked together and supported each other. But I saw many families spinning out of control, and it always seemed to be the mom who was the glue trying to hold it in control. It was always, And I understand being a black man, and I talk about it in the book. And not only with Augustus, but other men are put in positions when facing white men, and there's nothing they can do, and their children are looking at them to do something, and they just are on the edge of their dignity all the time, and and they explode. There's Augustus, and there's Arthur Pitts, and all these other men who are struggling, and then it's the wives who are saying, I have to take care of my children. I have to protect my husband physically and his ego. And so much of that weight falls on Trini. Um, and that also plays a part in her wanting Evan to just please stop this. I'm trying to keep your father from going off. I'm trying to keep you from causing trouble. I'm trying to keep our family together. Can't you just stop this nonsense of getting good grades? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. But her life is affected by all kinds of trauma, and she's not thinking right either, and many people are not. So and this particular husband and wife duo, I have unfortunately, for many readers have said they had so much trouble getting to understand the motivations of the parents vis-a-vis the child. They certainly understood their emotions vis-a-vis the systemic racism that we're dealing with in the town of Canaan.
Yeah, and I think if you maybe think about it in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, she was just looking at the base level of survival, right? She
Right,
needed to survive. She couldn't look beyond that to achieve things like education for her son.
right,
Um, so, yeah, if you think of it that way, it makes more sense. It's hard to read as a parent. This poor child that has happened to other children. But
right.
yeah, and thank you, Kenyatta, for joining us on stage. Welcome, Kenyatta Berry, who, as I mentioned, is the host of the PBS Genealogy Roadshow. Her specialty is African American and slavery genealogy research. And I'd love to hear your take on any of the things we've talked about, your own personal experiences, your research. We welcome you.
Well,
Hi,
thank you for
Kenyatta.
having me. Hi. Um, yeah, so it's so interesting you were talking about the trauma and the generational trauma because I was just actually saying to someone today that I feel like I'm part genealogist and part psychologist as
Yeah,
people do their research um and it just stays with them, the experience that their ancestors went through and different things and once you find it out, when I do presentations, I give it, obviously it's Black History Month, I give a lot of presentations and I do
right,
corporate presentations and I often show it's a probate record, but it has the names of two individuals with a value attached to them. And my experience in doing research for over 20 years, I see it and it's like, oh, okay, well, this is, Mary and George. And I have to remember other people's reaction to that.
right,
That is someone's ancestor, right? When you're knee deep in it. And I have to kind of warn people because it is shocking and it takes a lot out of you. So I think that trauma is real. I want to touch on the education thing.
hmm
The kind of, I mean, I'm from Detroit, but I went to what was called gifted and talented schools. Pretty nerdy. And I remember when I was probably, I think it was like 7 or 8, and my mom was trying to get me into a better school, right? So she was driving me around all the suburbs in Detroit and everything. And I just remember taking these tests to get a scholarship, but also realizing no one looked like me. So I didn't want to go to the school. And it's sort of this thing where with education, we know education is freedom because we were denied that freedom.
right,
And, but you also get that backlash from education, from your friends, when I decided to go to law school or any other thing, with what I do. So those stories are really, they're they're real, but it also even still happens today. And so that's, I just kind of, when you were talking about education and just the response, that made me think of that, which I hadn't thought about in years. And the other thing, last thing I will say is that it's important um, to talk about this stuff because it helps. I believe that slavery is the foundation of racism in America. So therefore, if we talk
Absolutely.
about these things, then, it's not getting over it, it's understanding it. And it's understanding that, when people ask me, how far back have you gone? I'm always like, okay, well, I'm about to tell you my fifth great grandmother that was enslaved, right, in Virginia. And I don't know how many kids she had. I
Yeah.
only find one daughter, right? I can't go off and be part of some lineage society. So this is very real for us. And I think it's important to talk about that stuff to educate each other, and which is why I do the work.
Agreed. And thank you for sharing those thoughts, Kenyatta. And I
Yes,
just want to mention
absolutely.
to those in the audience, Kenyatta also has her own show on Fireside. And if you click on her button, you can follow her because she's got a lot of good content that she shares, and conversation information as well. Kenyatta, do you feel comfortable sharing your own personal experience with your parents and what it was like for you, growing up, and how your parents kind of saw the world in terms of race?
Yeah, so my mom denies it, but I'm pretty sure she was part of the Black Panther Party, but she will deny it.
I love
To
it. I
this
love
day.
it.
Okay. So there's that. And I didn't get the name Kenyatta, for any reason. She basically told me that, or for good, I got it for a good reason, I should say. But she basically told me that, she didn't want me to be a burden in this world, no pressure. And that she wanted me to have a very powerful name. So my parents were pretty young. They were 19 and 21 when I was born. Even though my paternal side, my dad's side of the family is from Arkansas, I went back like once. So growing up in Detroit, and then my mom's maternal side and maternal side, her mother is from Detroit, or was born in Detroit, but my great grandmother was from upstate New York. So we never really had the experience, So I mean, we were in the hood in Detroit, still in the hood in Detroit. Everybody looked like me. If someone, if there was a white person in the neighborhood, you're like, okay, what are they doing here? They're buying drugs. Like, I mean, it was just like that because you didn't see anyone that was, and I'm not saying that's what they were doing, but it was just a very kind of, I wouldn't say shelter, but just kind of a, comfortable experience. Um, and, my parents were pretty open um, about things. And growing up, we come in all colors, at least in my family, from light to dark. So we really never really talked about it or anything, but I just knew that there were certain things that might happen. And my mom worked in healthcare, so she tried to shelter me a lot from stuff. And it wasn't until when I got to college that someone called me the N word, and like all of these things had never happened to me before. So I feel like within my family, they kind of, because of what they went through, my mom lived through the riots. So what she went through, what my dad went through, they were like, they're going to protect their baby girl. But it was once I got to college at Michigan State, it was sort of like, okay, we can't protect her anymore from that.
Right. Right.
And I think that was definitely hard for them. But I've always been, I had friends, that lived in the suburbs. My mom had a really good friend who lived in Traverse City, which is north, that was a white woman. So I just really never had any kind of negative talk or negative response or anything like that, right? Like it was kind of like, treat people as you want to be treated. And we're all human. I mean, it sounds very simple, but that's what it was
It
until I
sounds
got
very nice.
huh? What?
It sounds very nice.
Yeah, no, it was. It
Yeah.
was. That's why I always say I joke that I like unicorns and rainbows, and when the world gets too much, I like to hide because I'm like, I remember that time. What is going on over here? Yeah, but yeah, it's
But
been good.
it's when you talk about that and the experience you had growing up, that's one of the things I've had to discuss about the book, in terms of it being a different world for a lot of people, even for African Americans,
Mm-hmm.
to recognize that this sort of thing happens, um, and and in Evan's case, and in the case of the parents here, the great grandmother, Mama Jenny, speaks about Evan, but she's speaking about all actually the black children of generations that she has watched grow up, because she's in her 90s, and she refers to them as having, black children know who they is earlier. They grow up earlier,
Mm-hmm.
because they absorb what's happening around them, even if their parents don't talk to them directly. They will absorb it, and they have to process it, and they have to make the best they can of it for survival. So I'm happy. I'm sad that it ever happened to you. I'm happy you made it till you got to college, because when I was, being born in the late 50s and then growing up in the 60s and the 70s in the South, for me going to school, that was a regular occurrence.
Mm. Yeah, and if I could share just one last story, because what you're saying is just making me remember a lot of stuff. Like things are coming back, and my grandmother was from Arkansas, and I remember she worked as a domestic worker for this white family in the suburbs. And we went to the house, and the little boys they're probably my same age, but I'm like running around playing with them, and it was sort of like she had to pull me back. And I was like, well, what's up with this? Like, this doesn't
Yeah,
make any sense to me. But that's because she grew up with that.
yeah,
Um, and for that reason, I've never seen the movie The Help, and I never will.
yeah, yeah.
Because she took me to Saks Avenue. Like, she was everything to me. She was, such a force. And to see her be kind of, I won't say crushed, but just, submissive was
Yeah.
shocking to me.
Yeah.
When you see someone that's larger in life in your life because of your grandmother, and you're like 7 or 8, and they do so much for you and you love them so much. And then in front of this family, you don't know this place that she works, she's a different person. And how did that happen? And why did that happen?
Right. Right. And I think that is one of the things that Trini, the mother in the book, is she's escaped. And that's one of the things that makes her this idol of all the other black women who come to her porch every week to talk about it, because of the gift they had of this house and this land, and the earlier parts of their lives being able to take care of all their business on their own. She never had to clean anyone's house. She didn't have to do all the work that these other women are doing in the town. So that was something that she didn't want to give up also, and that was also something that Evan was putting her in a position to give up, and to become one of these women who had to then, depend on, the graces of white women to give them something in life, and which actually ended up happening to her in a better way than it does to most. But I would say my grandmother, my mother's mother, who I can't even begin to tell you how much I love her and how much of a influence she was on my life. But her whole life, she was a domestic. And her sister, my aunt, who I also loved, they both were domestics.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons I was like, well, I would never do that anyway, but I think that's probably why I went so far with my education, because just seeing that was just such a powerful moment.
We
I
lost
you.
Oh, can you hear me
there
now?
you go.
We lost
Okay,
you.
yeah, I'm sorry. I was just saying that that's probably why I continued with my education as far as I did, because seeing that was such a powerful moment for me. And I really wanted to make sure I was never in that situation, and that I had control, so to speak. So, but
Which
thank you
is
so much.
exactly, you were saying exactly what the main character Evan Walls saw and felt and was trying to do.
Yeah, that control is key. But thank you so much, Susan, for inviting me up. I've enjoyed these conversations, and I see someone else was on stage, so I'm just going to mute myself and hop down.
Thank you, Kenyatta. It was
Thank
a
you.
pleasure to chat with you. And I know that just initial R is on stage, so I don't know your first name, but welcome, R. Did you have a comment or a question for Jeffrey?
I do. My name is Rain, like raining outside. And
Hi, Rain.
Hi, Rain.
Kenyatta may even have some insight into this answer if she wanted to give any. But in terms of folks who say, why can't you just get over it? How do you have that discussion, to respond to that statement? And I guess talk maybe a little bit more about the intergenerational trauma. Because like my sister and I were having this conversation and she said, why can't they just get over it? And I didn't really have a good way to respond to that statement.
Well, I wish you could be with me in 2 days because I'm going to be giving a speech, and that's part of the speech. Well, there is an author by the name of Jonathan Odell, and he does a lot about, he speaks a lot about the power of story. And one of the things he says is that our story is our bridge to other people. And for us to be known, our story has to be known. People have to live inside of our narrative to understand what we're carrying. So the one way that I see that people can begin to realize that what we are carrying as African Americans is not something that you can just forget about. One we just talked about is passed from generation to generation. It's this intergenerational trauma. And it has an effect on me. And if you can see me and look at me as a human being, and try to focus on my humanity, it might be easier for you to recognize that people are hurt by things, and people are hurt by legacies. And if you were to stop for a second and look at yourself and your life, you would understand that your parents have affected you in a way that will affect your children. It's undoubtedly going to happen. And so why would you then say that if I knew my great grandmother, who was a child of a slave, and I can tell you when I was why would it not affect me? When I would sit at her knee and have her tell us, she would talk to us about what her parents would say slavery was like. She talked to us and she would tell us, and maybe we were too young to know these things, but how her parents would watch their friends stretch over an oil barrel, hands tied on one side and feet tied on the other, tight, and whipped until their skin split. And she would tell us these stories. And how can you not carry that trauma with that? And how can you just turn around and forget that? And then also, how can you forget what you see? As James Baldwin says, I don't believe what you say because I see what you do. What you're doing is we can see it now. And if we just look at the struggle we're having with police officers right now, you can see it. And it's a legacy thing. So, it's a longer, well, first of all, she has to be open to the idea that people are affected by their legacy. There's a reason why psychiatrists tell you, they sit you down and they say, let's talk about your history, because you've been formed, and that formation will affect how you live your life. So someone just has to be, you have to try to see if they're even open to listening to you about that. But the best thing is to, understand that someone has a story different than your story. And if you want to see the whole person and understand how they feel and how they're reacting and how they approach life, you have to understand their history. If you deny their history, you'll never understand. And then you'll always be asking yourself that question of, why can't they get over it? And I bet that there are, if you look at it, there are 5 to 10 things you can look at in their lives and say, why can't you get over that? That happened 10 years ago. Why can't you get over it? Reflect on why you get to carry your history, but Black folk don't get to carry their history.
That's a great point. And Ray, can I ask you, do you feel comfortable sharing what your own experience growing up was with your parents, and in terms of race? Did you have conversations? What kind of background did you come from in that regard?
So I am also from Michigan, but I live up by Lansing, and my hometown is not very diverse. And I don't really remember having conversations about race. I always kind of said, like my parents are divorced. I lived with my mom. And I don't really remember her being racist. I'm sure that she said things that were racist, but I didn't understand them in that way at the time. The biggest thing that I ever remember is like driving on a road through a more rundown part of town and her saying, "Lock the doors." There's a man walking down the street. And I was like, we're in a moving car, Mom. Like, he's not going to get in the car with us when we're moving. And, you know, and that was so weird to me to like, even though we were coming up to a red light, like, why would we be worried about this man jumping in the car with us that I need to lock my door? And that's really the only specific example that I can give. My dad is a whole other story, but he has just yeah. We'll just leave it at that.
Well, Rain, I'm appreciative of your being open to having this discussion and talking about it, and talking about the person who you're trying to open some eyes and let them know. One of the issues with understanding our story and becoming a part of each other's narrative is understanding that in this country, for the most part, that isn't the case. I taught a class at George Washington University on bias in the media. And when I show up for the first day of class, there is the class is a majority white. It's the same as the country, right? Mm-hmm. And so I come armed with a question. And I say to them, to the white kids first, when you were growing up, how many of you, raise your hand, had a black friend, school friend over to spend the night? No one raised their hand. How many had a black friend over for lunch or dinner? Nobody raised their hand. So I asked the black kids, how many of you had white kids over for sleepover? Nobody raised their hand. One woman raised her hand to having a white friend over for lunch. So I taught that class twice more, and the numbers don't significantly change. Now, my son went to a small school up in upstate New York, a liberal arts school. And he landed on campus, said, I got to get a job. I need some spending change. He got a job working as giving tours at the school. I was confused by this because he showed up on campus an activist ready to go. He had identified some issues with students of color. And so he hit the ground running. He was leading protests. He was speaking. He was on the radio, college radio talking. He even took on the president of the college in an all-college event. He challenged her. And to their credit, they gave him an award at the end of the year for looking out for his fellow students, Good Citizenship Award. But I said to him, I'm confused. You got a school that you say has all this trouble, and yet you're giving tours and inviting people to come here. And he said, Dad, I can't remember the last time, if ever, a black person or person of color was in my tour group. It's almost always white. And so this is the thing that hit me, that my son was telling me that. He said, the things that I am fighting about, the troubles that children of color have, they don't have to worry about it. And most of them had never considered it. I have never been asked by a white person on tour about any issue with regard to diversity. Never happened. So, Dad, we will be on the same campus, but we'll go to different schools. And both of those are an example of how we live outside of each other's narrative most of the time. And it shouldn't come as a shock to any of us that we can't cross this line, and why your roommate or friend can't seem to understand what's going on in an African American community or an African American's mind. Because you can grow up. Ask yourself, why does it happen that you can grow up and not have that shared experience? What does it say about each community and what they think about the other person of color? your mother already showed you that. Close the door, because she
Yep.
knows, she's been taught that this is a negative thing about Black people. So we live so far out of each other's reality. Sometimes it's amazing that we are here right now having conversations like this, which is a good thing. But
Yeah.
I think that points to some of what you were talking about.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer. And, my mom was a teenager in the 60s. She graduated from high school in 69. And so I often wondered if some of her reactions and saying things like lock the door was because of what was going on in the country during her childhood and her teenage years. And that, so that was her lived experience. And, I was telling my sister, well, we were talking about lived experiences too, but I didn't, think to kind of join that into the conversation of saying, well, what is something you can't get over? And so I really appreciate that insight. And through my workplace, we've been having a lot of sessions in the last couple of years about diversity and equity. And I try to attend those as frequently as I can. And that has really just been very insightful to hear everything that's being talked about. And so I appreciate having this series as well. Thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us on stage. And I know you wanted Kenyatta's input on that as well. And she's joined us on stage. So Kenyatta, did you have some thoughts on that? And also, Kenyatta, do you mind if I put you on camera?
Well, yeah, I didn't do my hair today, so. So I'm sitting on my couch in Santa Monica. I'm like, wait a minute,
No worries.
I'm not camera ready, but I appreciate you asking me though. So my thought on that is that the just get over it type of thing is just think about, for anyone who has children, I don't, but just think about the heartbreak of having your son, your daughter, your husband taken away from you. You have no control over that. And as a teenager, as an African American, as an enslaved woman, teenager, you have no agency over your own body. Those are the things that people really that I think people need to consider, I should say, because you can't get over it when you know that an ancestor of yours, might have been used to breed. And that's kind of like, those are hard discussions to have. Those are hard things to hear, but that was the reality. And it's also part of American history. It's not like it's not just our history. This is American history.
Yeah.
And everyone needs to know it and talk about it. And so it's difficult, but it's necessary. And it's important because when you understand me and you understand kind of what my ancestors went through, and that I can't just, be like, oh, well, my family's from, I don't know, Ireland or whatever. And that it takes me, that it's like looking for a needle in a haystack, and looking for a needle in a haystack with trauma attached to it at every point in time.
Yeah. From
slavery to Reconstruction to Jim Crow. We can't just kind of sweep that under the rug.
No, it's very, very sobering. And I really appreciate your joining us, Kenyatta, and your thoughts, Rain, for sharing yours as well. I know we have a couple more people joining us on stage. So I think Anthony was next. Anthony, welcome. Oh, Anthony, you're muted.
There we go. There we go.
Welcome.
Hi, Anthony.
All right. Thank you. Hey, I love this question. Why can't we get over it? Some of the reasons we can't get over it is because we're still living it every day. We're still living it. When we have to go out the door, we have to think about, where are we going? Are there going to be racist white people there? We have to think about it when we want to choose a place to live. Are my neighbors going to hate me? are my neighbors going to attack me for nothing, just for being the color I am? Um, and it's happened in my own neighborhood. I could be in my own neighborhood. It's a beautiful day, roof open, and somebody will say, "Move your ass, N word." This happens all the time. The
Yeah.
things we have to go through on a daily basis, like when I go to the store, just a little grocery store, get some gas, I always get a receipt. And the reason I always get a receipt is because as
I
soon as
know.
I get out the door or before I get out the door, somebody may accuse me of stealing something.
Yeah.
And see, this happens all the time. I have to tell my children, hey, don't do this. Don't bring any attention to yourself. If police see anything wrong with your vehicle, they're going to come see you. And who knows what happens.
And
So,
Anthony,
go ahead.
I have to tell you that you just hit something for me. My mother used to say when we were growing up, she would say, never leave a store without whatever you buy in a bag and have a receipt. And
Receipt,
so
exactly.
even today, I will leave a store and I'm here in DC where they make you pay for the bags and everything, and a lot of people just get the receipt and walk out with the item. I have trouble doing
Not
that.
you.
Not
I
me.
understand. Yeah, me
Yeah,
too. Me
yeah.
too. The story Rain told about locking the doors. I mean, even as a kid, now I grew up in Long Island, New York. Daily walking home from school, if we come to a traffic light and there's white people, what do you hear? Click, 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 click. And back then, they didn't have automatic door locks. So you see moms reaching over to kids, locking doors and all of that.
Yeah.
But it's an everyday thing. It has never stopped. This is
Anthony,
why
how
we
old are
can't
your
get
children?
over it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Excuse me?
How old are your children?
Oh, my children are in their low 40s and mid 30s. But
And how old were they when you felt compelled to talk to them, and how did you broach that with them?
it's actually day one.
Hmm.
Day one, I always have to keep it in my mind of where are they going to go? What am I going to tell them to help protect them? But then on the other hand, I'm the type of person, especially in the South, uh, Jeff will know this. Parents will tell their children, that's not for us. There's certain
Absolutely.
places, right? That's not
Yep.
for us. There's
For
certain
us. Yep.
places we can't go. That's not for us. And that's what people do to protect their children. So, you can't go to the zoo. You can't go to a certain pool. You can't go to a certain amusement park. That's not for us. Even most people know about Stone Mountain and the largest Confederate monument in the world. Um, I took my family there once, and everything was okay. And my kids were young. Actually, the youngest one wasn't born yet, and everything was nice. And we're watching the laser light show, and then they come up with the what's the last song? Georgia. So they have Georgia playing, and it was a black man, Ray Charles. And then all we heard was, take that N word down, take that N word down. And I'm surrounded by white people, and I'm not able to say anything because
Yeah.
I want to protect my family.
Right.
Because if I said anything, honestly, we probably would have been lynched. And this is in the 1980s. So this is why we can't get over it. And this is why I'll always talk about it. So I'm glad for this platform. This is wonderful.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Anthony.
Thank you.
Anthony.
We appreciate your candor and also sharing your pain. I mean, I think that helps educate us on what you've had to experience, because those of us who have never experienced it can't imagine what it would be like. I mean, I can't imagine having to tell my kids, watch out for this, watch out for that, don't get in an elevator with a woman. Whoever thinks of that? So, and unless we hear your stories, and they're very powerful. So thank you for
Well,
joining us. Appreciate
well,
that.
thank you for having me. I've got one more thing I want to say, and then I'll be done. My wife and I do have a podcast. Okay, we did one episode on racism and what we experienced growing up black in America. Nobody showed up.
Oh wow! And why do you? Was it
Most
on
of our
Fireside?
audience, excuse me.
Was it on
No, it
Fireside?
wasn't on Fireside. No, no.
Okay.
But the thing is,
Oh, we lost you, Anthony.
hello,
Yeah,
and
we lost you.
lost me. Oh shoot.
Yeah, just repeat your last sentence. We
Okay,
didn't hear that.
you can hear me now.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. So we usually get anywhere from maybe 100 and something listeners a week. But that episode 13.
Uh,
So that's telling you our audience is mostly white and they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it from us.
well, I read an article today about white families trying to have their kids opt out of Black History Month in public schools.
Oh, yes.
So
Yes.
yeah, so it's this is another reason why you can't get over it.
Yeah, we can't get over it. Never will.
Yeah.
We
Well,
need
and
to keep speaking up.
especially since Black history is relegated to a 28-day period out of the year.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
until it's mainstreamed throughout all of our history teachings.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, and Susan, I loved your question earlier of terrain, which was, what did your parents tell you? Which was an excellent question because decent white parents should tell their children, hey, black people in this country have had it bad. We need to do something about that. Even though we didn't enslave them ourselves, we still have a responsibility as a people to help make some change. All of us, whether we're black or white in this country, should be some type of everyday activist. Some type, whatever it is you choose to do. It doesn't matter. Just do something.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think we don't have these conversations because it's uncomfortable, and people don't like to do things that are uncomfortable. And that's one of the reasons Jeffrey and I talked about this before, is that we like using the vehicle of a book discussion, because I think it helps
Yes.
remove an element of discomfort maybe when we're talking about fictional characters, even though they're
Yes.
based on actual people, actual stories. So I'm glad you shared your thoughts, Anthony. I'm glad that everybody is doing so. In fact, we have Deanna joining us on stage. Unless you had anything else, Anthony.
No, I'm good. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us,
All right.
and welcome, Deanna.
Oh, hi. Thanks for having me up. I am appreciating the opportunity to speak here with you guys because I grew up in the Deep South. So I'm 53 and my mom is 72. And she went to France, which is where Ruby Bridges, and I'm sure you guys know exactly who that is,
Yeah.
was walked into the school. And she was part of the white people who were bussed away from that school and yelling and screaming and throwing things at a little 6-year-old. Of course, later she recognized, and that's where I think generational comes in on both sides. You can't tell people why can't you get over it. I can't imagine my daughter who was molested and someone say, why can't you get over it?
Yeah.
decades down the road. And when her kids learn some of the trauma that she's experienced, them saying to her, well, why can't you get over it? You know, and that's what this is. And I agree that, you know, legally, quote unquote, slavery was abolished, but it wasn't. It wasn't. You were out of ownership, but you were still enslaved to a system, and it still is happening. It amazes me. So while I can't 100% relate, you know, my sister is married to a black man. She has interracial marriage and she has mixed children, and I worry for that because of this, because their father has to watch what he does and who he's with and where he sits in the car, and when they get stopped and pulled over, whether or not he's going to get a ticket for not having a seatbelt on in the back seat when that would never have happened otherwise. You know, it's just so many things. But what I want to say here in appreciation, so I'm from New Orleans. I don't know if you can tell by the way I speak. And we had a few years back, we had a mayor who went through the city and pulled down Confederate statues. And he wrote a book on it too. And one of there was a lot of mixed emotions about that. People were like, you can't erase history and blah, blah, blah. And he said there's a very different in remembering your history and revering something. And these statues were specifically erected to send a message to our Black citizens who needed to understand that who was still in charge of the city, regardless of what the federal laws were put in place. And so he removed them. And I think things like that are the things that are opening up these conversations. And so I just want to go ahead. I'm sorry.
Can I ask you, so when your sister married a black man, how was that received in your own family or your own, you know, your inner circle, your friends, your family?
Oh, fine. I mean, I am a person who can answer that we've had Black friends spend the night. We've had Black friends for dinner. My parents were very hippie and open and free love. So there was a whole lot of change. It's not miraculous. They're not, you know, but you know, that was not an issue. It's so much so that our Black friends didn't tell us their troubles, because we didn't know that's how they lived. We didn't know that. When they were with us, they were safe and they knew that. But we didn't know when they walked outside of our doors and we went into public with them that they had something else they were presenting that we didn't realize. When I grew up, I realized this later. I remember an incident where one of our friends was with us at a ballpark. We lived in an area that was, I don't know, it was an up and coming, maybe kind of middle class, yuppie-ish type of place, but we were not. We were poor. I would say we were poor, and we had government assistance when my parents were able to buy their house. We have 6 kids in our family. So when that girl came with us to the park, and it was a mixed league, adult league, my parents played ball, somebody, you know, started making fun about who brought this N-word little girl to the park. And we were playing and we kind of heard it, but we didn't really register all that was going on. My uncle stepped up and said, that's my daughter. Do you have a problem with it? And there was pretty much a real close call to some fist fighting going on there. And that was the first time that I realized, oh, you know, I guess other people don't have Black friends and don't bring them to the park with them. You know, it just didn't. So it didn't register for me, and it didn't register for me till I was an adult. And until the statues came down, I didn't even talk to my black friends as to how things were for them outside of our relationship. So I didn't even that. It, you know, like you said, you live in your lane.
Right.
And you don't know. And
Yeah.
even though I had these friends, I didn't know what was going on in their world, or how they had to move in the world outside of when they were with us. I didn't
Well,
know.
I
And
thank you for
and that's
sharing.
a Yeah, and that's a lesson. I thank you too, and that's a lesson for all of us to learn, that if we really want to help each other, we have to go a little deeper sometimes, and we have those friendships. And now when now that you're aware, I would say you're probably much more aware, than your parents were about what's going on. And when you have those friendships, first you just can't, let's go out to beer and talk about this the first time you meet somebody. But over a period of time, you feel more comfortable in having that conversation, and then your families can have that conversation, and everybody learns, including the children involved. And so we have where you can have intergenerational trauma, you can also have intergenerational education,
And,
that
and
goes
healing,
beyond
right?
that. And yeah, yeah. And I want to say that if everybody out there can just Google Mitch Landrieu's, um, speech that he made about taking down the statues in New Orleans, it
Yeah,
is phenomenal. It is
it is.
absolutely phenomenal.
And he wrote a book on it. And he also was on Oprah. I think he was on a Soul Sunday as well,
Yeah.
which was another great, amazing interview. But so this is one of the things too, just, I know you probably over time, but one of the last things that I wanted to mention when people hear the words white privilege, um, you know, uh, I've had white people take a lot of offense to that, because they want to say, well, I'm not privileged. I'm broke. I'm fighting for my custody of my kids. I'm this, that, and the other. And I say, yeah, you know what? And I grew up poor, but that's not the point. That's not the privilege they're talking about. You have the privilege to walk into a store and not look over your shoulder and worry about if the security guard is following you around because of the color of your skin. That is the privilege we're talking about. We're talking about that privilege. And just the fact that some people just don't register what that means, and even opening up conversations with other white friends of mine, which is a little bit easier, um,
Yeah.
is still a conversation I think that needs to happen, because yes, you are, to a degree, there is a level that you don't have to deal with that other people do, and you have
Yeah,
to
And
recognize it.
I
and
think that's.
sometimes,
Oh, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. Go ahead, Susan.
Oh, I was just going to say, as we're winding down our time, I think that's a great point that you bring up, because really, unless we hear the stories of, Jeffrey and Kenyatta and Anthony, and also, our stories of, the what our parents taught us and modeled for us that led to some of these problems. I think unless we have these honest conversations, nothing's going to change. And so thank you, Deanna, for sharing all your thoughts with us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me up here.
Yes, you're welcome. And Jeffrey, you had something. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to, what Deanna was saying in terms of white privilege is right. Um, it's hard to make people see and understand, that privilege until they're in a situation where, or if you're with someone who's in a situation where you can point out, see, you were able to do that, and I can't do that. Or I think it, might have been Anthony who said, we can't go places and do things. If you're with another white friend and they say, well, let's go over here and do this, or let's do that. Or a lot of white guys I went to college with would take all kinds of risks. Well, I might get caught, but they had a feeling that if they got caught, not much was going to happen, right? They might get a slap on the wrist, they might call their parents, but they're going to be fine. I could never take that risk, and they would say, "What's wrong with you? When you stuck in you why are you stick in the mud? You can't do that." But so privilege was absolutely 100% identified. Just a week or so ago, when two teenagers were fighting in the mall, black boy, white boy, the police show up very quickly. They sit the white boy down on the couch. They throw the black boy down on the ground, put their knees in his back, and cuff him and arrest him. And the white kid knows that he knows immediately that something's wrong. He feels a privilege to the point that he tells them, you can arrest me too. And they still refuse to do it. This is, that's, and Rain, that's another example of why we can't get over it. because it just smacks you in the face over and over and over again. And I never really read from my book because my agent always told me, unless you're an actor, you can only do harm to your book. But there was one section to what Deanna was just what she was saying, and young Evan goes over to play basketball with his two white friends. He sneaks over to play with them, and as he's playing with them, a neighbor comes by and is looking as wide as a black boy in the neighborhood, and his two friends flip them off, give him the bird. And Evan, again, he can't do that. He's not going to do that. And he has an epiphany. He says, I came to these two boys. I could never be a part of them. I'd never see the world as they did, never have the world react to me in the same way. They were regular white boys who liked to yell, wear John Deere hats, and go hunting. They had the comfortable swagger of white boys, the kind of stride that came with the knowledge that the world was yours to explore and to own. Later on, I would hear John Denver singing, life ain't nothing but a funny, funny riddle, thank God I'm a country boy. I would think about Eddie and Dee and how they could walk through life with an ease I could never touch. And Deanna, when you talked about that, reminded me of that.
Yeah, and that's another reason that we hope everybody will read The Emancipation of Evan Walls. You can go to our website, adventuresbythebook.com, order an autographed copy. For those of you who have ordered one, thank you. They are being shipped out as we speak. So you'll have a chance to chat more once you've read the book or read parts of it, because we are going to continue this conversation for 3 more weeks, including next week on Thursday, March 3rd. We are going to be speaking about the 2 characters in the book, Bojack and Mama Jenny, who actually are supporters of Evan Walls and helped him get through the ostracism that he experienced and the hatred and the violence that he experienced as a child. So I encourage you to join us next week. Read a copy of Emancipation of Evan Walls. And if you want to come back in less than 2 hours, we have another fireside chat with another author. I Am a Girl from Africa. And this is with Elizabeth Naya-Maoro. And she is actually an award-winning humanitarian and former United Nations Senior Advisor on Gender Equality. And she was born in Zimbabwe, and she has a lot of stories to share about her experiences too. So that's in a little less than 2 hours. Just follow us on, if you click on my image, Susan, and follow me, you will get notice of our next session with Jeffrey, our next sessions, plural, with Jeffrey, our session with Elizabeth Naya-Maoro, and also weekly when we host authors. You can click on Jeffrey's his icon and follow him so that anytime he's on Fireside, you will get notification of that. And I want to thank Jeffrey again for a really enlightening conversation today. And also,
thank you, Susan.
Yeah, and also to all our audience members. It was great to have audience participation today. It really makes the conversation more meaningful and engaging. And because we all have different points of experience, and unless we share those and understand where each other are coming from, nothing, no problems with race are ever going to get resolved. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you, Jeffrey. And until next time.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Everyone.